we have found out that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are not going to be participating whenever the league resumes. Clearly, this is big news because Brooklyn is one of the 22 teams that is going to be there. And more importantly, you know, if those guys are going to be able to play, it's a different world if you're Toronto, right? Sitting at the 2 seed. You know, if you're drawing Brooklyn without those guys, you've got basically a bye. Brooklyn with those guys, now that's a different deal. But they're both not going to be playing. And one of the issues that has come up, and who knows the way this is going to play itself out, was that if you're not going to be there with these rosters and you are going to be somebody on the injured list, that they don't want you going down there, being with that team, rehabbing down there. You just basically will be separate and apart from your team. Kyrie has already said he wants to be there. You know, he wants to be there and he wants to be able to root on his team. But we've had those 2 guys. And then yesterday, out of nowhere, it's announced that Lamarcus Aldridge had surgery like a month and a half ago on his shoulder, and he is not going to be playing for the rest of this season, as it were. We already had one earlier.
That makes the Spurs a lot interesting.
Yeah, well, and it got lost in the shuffle because we talked about it several weeks ago, but obviously we've talked about a million things since then. But Bogdanovich, he's done. You know, he had his surgery, so he's done for Utah. So we already know, we kind of presupposed that maybe Durant and Irving would be out, but now we know for sure. But now, like if the Spurs were going to go on some kind of run in the 8 games, you know.
Not anymore.
Right? Not anymore with Aldridge being out, you would imagine. And then you've got the Bogdanovich thing, which we covered a couple of weeks ago. But what do you make of it's so strict that even guys that are on the team, if you're not playing, you're not going to be there?
Yeah, I mean, it's the right call. Fewer bodies, the better. Simple as that.
I think so.
I mean, I think that's true for everybody. I mean, it sounds like teams will be restricted to about 35 per team, which is not a lot at all. We're talking 15 players and then 20 personnel, including the coaching staff and trainers and strength and conditioning and maybe one front office member. It's going to be limited, man. There's not going to be, they said a maximum of 1,600 people at any time. That's going to include family once they're introduced. It's going to include, you know, a handful of media members, you know, probably mostly represented from ESPN and TNT, the networks that are actually going to broadcast this event. It's not going to be a ton of people. Agents won't be allowed. That was said on the call yesterday that I reported about. Yeah, man, like there's just not going to be a lot of people there that don't have to be. And so if you're injured already, like there's just no reason for you to be there. I mean, there's just not. And maybe unless you're already there, like if you get hurt when you're there, and hopefully that doesn't happen. I mean, we always wish for no injuries. But if a guy gets hurt while he's there, then that might be a different story. But if a guy's hurt right now, I mean, I don't think there's any use personally.
And one of the things they're trying to figure out, because you had mentioned earlier, it stands to reason probably we're going to have somebody test positive for coronavirus, one way or the other, right? And so you have to, and they don't want to shut the whole thing down. You reported on getting whoever tests positive, getting them away for 10 days. And one of the things that clearly comes up on the comes on the heels of that is, okay, well, how are we supposed to replace these guys, right? Like, who is going to be available to play for us? How are we going to be able to acquire players? And it seems like, I mean, you got your two-way, so you better hope your this is where it really matters if your two-way players are good, because they absolutely could be used, you know, especially given the situation at hand. You catch a couple injuries and you catch somebody with coronavirus, or God forbid, 3 guys, you know, that are been hanging out a bunch, all test positive, and you've got to try to throw together a roster. Like, we know that the two-way guys are the first ones. And so having good ones, having guys that can actually play on an NBA level, certainly that becomes much more important now than it might have been ever before.
That's actually worth noting as well, that two-way players, there's some confusion or lack of clarity from the league to the teams right now of whether those two-way players will actually be allowed on campus at Disney World, or whether they have to like fly them out, quarantine them, and then be able to use them in games if somebody gets hurt as a replacement player. I would assume it'll come down to the point that like those players will be allowed there from the jump. That just makes more sense to me personally. Like I mentioned, I just said like don't introduce more people, but they're part of the team. So like it does make some sense to have them there in the first place. But it is also worth noting that there will be a transaction window possibly starting around June 22nd in which all 30 teams will be allowed to sign current free agents. It remains to be seen what free agents that will actually include. Right now, it seems like it could be guys that were either on a G League roster at any point during the season or guys that were on an NBA roster during training camp. So that would mean a guy like DeMarcus Cousins, who was with the Lakers but waived in February, would be allowed to be signed by a team. However, somebody like J.R. Smith or Jamal Crawford would not be allowed to be signed because they've been unsigned throughout the season. Again, this is not finalized. It could change. And for the league, it's really about balancing what is fair to the 8 teams that aren't playing, because some of those 8 teams would logically want to sign some of these guys, right? But if you're one of those players, why would you sign with the Atlanta Hawks or the New York Knicks or the Golden State Warriors if you're not playing basketball this summer or even having an opportunity to play basketball this summer compared to one of the 22 other teams? But also, like, why is it fair for DeMarcus Cousins to sign with a team, but not J.R. Smith? J.R. Smith is logically a player that teams would want to sign as a 3-point shooting wing, the guy that they would have signed in March had they had the opportunity to that month. Right? Like, why wouldn't a Kendrick?
I mean,
look, so it's a tough balance here.
Especially if you just want somebody to protect your car. Man, he whooped that dude's ass. Man, he whooped his ass. That was the best. I watched that video 1,000 times. Great.
Oh my goodness.
But to your point, I saw Bobby Marks tweet about this, and it's one of those where you go, you never know how significant those moves can end up being sometimes for some of these teams, because at the end of the season last year, when this is available, the Miami Heat went and they signed Duncan Robinson and they signed Kendrick Nunn. And look now. I mean, those guys are like all rookie caliber guys that have played major minutes and had really good seasons for them. And so when you realize that is the type of guy that might actually, when you're signing them now at the end of the season, like, it's not just through the end of this. These are guys that could theoretically have a significant impact for you going forward. And that's why I'm saying when you bring up like the Hawks or somebody, like, clearly it's a great opportunity to acquire talent, for the years going forward.
You mentioned 2-way contracts, guys that were 2-ways, Duncan Robinson, Alex Caruso on the Lakers, Chris Boucher on the Raptors, some quality reserve players.
None is going to be in the top 3 for Rookie of the Year. Yeah. Nunn's going to be probably third, right? Maybe second, depending on how many people hold limited amount of games against Zion. But Nunn's had a fantastic year for Miami, and he's one of those guys too.
Bol is on a 2-way contract. Bol. I mean, there's some quality players. Or for like the Rockets, I used to love this prospect, Michael Frazier, out of Florida. And like, he can shoot the lights out. And for Houston, he's gotten a couple opportunities to play this year as a reserve for them. Like, if they have a guy get hurt, I mean, Michael Frazier's realistically a guy that they would want to call up and get an opportunity to play.
Well, and it's interesting because you're going to see how these teams utilize this. Yeah, the way I read it, the Nets are going to get to replace Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving spots on the roster. They're like, if you got guys that you're saying they can't play anymore, you get to replace those spots. So this could be very, very significant. I mean, I'll give you just a for instance, right? With the team where I am, the Grizzlies, Grayson Allen has got a hip injury and he's done. And they signed right before this all got shut down. They signed Jonte Porter. Jonte Porter is not going to be able to play until next year either. And so there's a team that is currently in the playoffs. They're going to be able to add theoretically 2 more guys to that roster. And if your scouting department, was really good and you've done the work, I mean, you could really, you could, because of this could really alter some teams going forward if they hit. Because if you catch a Robinson or you catch a Nunn, I mean, you got a starter and an 8-man rotation guy maybe for the next 5 to 10 years in some cases.
Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. It's an opportunity, and that's where for the league, like, it's going to be very interesting to see what they actually end up agreeing on with the PA. Because right now it's undetermined. It's, as I stated, seems to be what's most likely, but we'll see if they just open up the entire pool, everybody, and allow like the Jamal Crawfords and J.R. Smiths to sign with teams or not. Maybe they just restrict it strictly to G League, and that's it. Remains to be seen.